The first thing I noticed was the stain that kept coming back. A thin, rust-brown bead on the baseboard beside my bedroom door. I wiped it once with a paper towel and told myself it was old plumbing, old paint, old anything. The next night, it was there again, exactly where the wood met the wall, like the apartment was trying to remember where to bleed. I moved into Evelyn Hart's place because it was cheap and because I didn't have the energy to explain my life to roommates who still talked to their parents every day. I was 20. I'd been tossed out of a military program for reasons people like to simplify into one word, and I let them. It was easier to be the guy who stole than the guy who couldn't stop himself from reaching when he saw something he wanted. Evelyn didn't ask questions. Her building sat on a tree-lined street in a quiet part of Milwaukee, the kind of neighborhood that makes you feel like you're already behaving better just by standing there. In the mornings, it smelled like wet leaves. In the afternoons, sunlight hit the porch steps like it had nowhere else to be. Inside, the apartment felt managed. 2 bedrooms, a narrow living room, a kitchen with cabinets that didn't quite shut, and a hallway that stayed cold, even when the heat was on. The walls were thin enough that you learned the rhythm of other people's breathing. Evelyn lived in the back room. I had the front. The other bedroom, between us, was for whoever else needed a bed and didn't mind rules. And there were rules. Not printed, not taped to the fridge, not dressed up as a lease agreement. Just said once, calmly, as if she was explaining how to keep mice out. When the porch light went dark, the apartment needed to be absolutely quiet. No kitchen, no bathroom, no running water, no opening windows, no pacing, no just real quick. If you broke the rules, she said, the apartment got upset. She didn't say what that meant. She didn't have to. The first guys I lived with, 3 seniors from my community college, treated those rules like gravity, like something you didn't argue with if you wanted to keep walking upright. One of them, a tall kid named Marcus, leaned close the first night and told me the only thing that mattered. Keep your windows shut. He didn't make it into a joke, didn't smile. Just said it and went back to plugging his phone into the wall like it was a life support machine. Then he added one more thing, almost like he hated himself for saying it. Sometimes people vanish in this building. Sometimes the only thing left is the space they used to fill. After that, he wouldn't talk about it again. For almost a year, I followed the rules like they were part of my body. I learned to eat early. I learned to shower while it was still light out. I learned to keep a bottle by my bed and not hate myself for using it. The apartment trained me, and I let it. On weekends, Evelyn would cook too much and slide a plate onto the table like she was doing me a favor and not buying my silence. She had a gentle way of speaking that didn't invite interruption. She knew theater trivia, local history, the names of parks I'd never visited. If you looked at her in the morning, she was just an older woman with neat hair and careful hands. If you listened at night, when the porch light clicked off and the air in the hallway changed, she became something else without ever leaving her skin. It started as soft movement outside my door, a shuffle, a pause, a slow exhale that sounded like someone putting weight down on old wood. Then a faint brushing at my doorknob, like a fingertip testing the metal. The first time it happened, every muscle in my body wanted to stand up and open the door, not because I was brave, because I needed the fear to have a shape. But the rules sat in my head like nails. I stayed still. The movement passed, and nothing happened. So I decided it was harmless, a habit, a sleep disorder, a lonely old woman walking her own hallway because she couldn't sleep. That story worked until late summer, after I came back from crashing on friends' couches and pretending I still had a life I controlled. Marcus and the others had moved out. Evelyn replaced them with freshmen who didn't know how to be afraid yet. 3 of them. Ethan, who wore brand new shoes like he'd never stepped in anything real. Caleb, who laughed too loudly even when the room was quiet. And Reed, a tall, red-haired kid who treated every request like a dare. I moved into the middle room, the bigger one, because I'd been there the longest, and because Evelyn offered it like a promotion. The way she phrased it made me feel chosen. The first night, the freshmen tested the air. They kept the lights on. They watched videos. They made the kind of noise you make when you believe the world is basically safe. I tried to warn them the way Marcus warned me, without drama, without begging. I explained the rules. They reacted the way people react when they've never had consequences that didn't come with a lecture. Reed sprawled on his bed and kept tapping his phone, his screen lighting the room in short, bright pulses. Ethan and Caleb whispered and snickered behind the wall like they were in on a joke I couldn't hear. The porch light went out. The hallway cooled. My eyes adjusted to the dim amber leaking under my door, and I stared at the frosted glass panel in the living room door across from me. It wasn't a full window, just a decorative strip that blurred shapes. That strip showed me Evelyn when she stepped out. Not clearly, but enough. A pale outline in a robe, a slow, exaggerated bend, like her joints didn't agree on what direction they belonged. She stopped outside the freshman's door and stayed there. No knocking, no scolding, just waiting. The air felt heavier, like the apartment was holding its breath. Then something moved, not like a person walking, but like a weight being dragged across a floor that didn't want it. A dense shape slid into the hallway's line of light. The robe was still there, still hanging from it, but the body beneath no longer matched what cloth was supposed to cover. A bulge pressed against the fabric, then eased away. Another bulge followed, higher this time, like a joint rolling under skin that wasn't meant to have joints. The shape leaned toward the freshman's door, and the door, I swear to you, leaned back. I didn't hear screaming. I didn't hear a struggle. That's what makes it hard to explain, and why I know you'll want to call it exaggeration. What I heard was a sound like dry metal links being pulled under tension and then abruptly released. A shuddering vibration that traveled through the wall and settled in my ribs. Then a soft thud like a backpack dropping onto carpet. Then nothing. Absolute, obedient silence. The hallway light that always glowed faintly along the floor went out, not like it had been switched off, like it had been swallowed. I lay there with my face pressed into my pillow, counting my own breaths because it was the only proof I still existed. When morning finally came, the apartment looked normal again. The kitchen smelled like coffee and butter. Evelyn sat at the table with a newspaper, humming under her breath without a tune you could follow. Her hands were clean. Her robe was tied neatly. She asked me how my classes were going. In the hallway, there were 2 tiny rust-brown spots on the floor near the freshman's door. Almost dry, almost polite. By the time I stepped out of the bathroom, those spots were gone. Evelyn never went into their room while I watched. She didn't have to. It wasn't until that afternoon that my mind did the thing it does when it wants relief. It started collecting facts, the way a gambler counts chips. Reed had a nice laptop. Ethan had wireless earbuds. Caleb had a leather bag with a brand logo I recognized. I told myself they were gone. I told myself nobody would come looking. Freshmen disappear all the time in a city. People drop out. People transfer. People run home. People reinvent themselves. And even if someone asked questions, what would I say? That an older woman in a quiet neighborhood had an apartment that got upset after dark. That I watched a shape wearing her robe move wrong and then heard metal chain noises through a wall. Number one, I could already hear the laughter. I could already see the polite faces of police officers trying not to roll their eyes. So I didn't report anything. I did what I had always done when fear and opportunity shared the same room. I rationalized. Evelyn asked me, casually, if I knew anyone else who needed a cheap place to stay. She said it was hard to find reliable tenants once the semester started. She said she liked quiet people. I told her I'd think about it. Then she asked something that made my mouth go dry. Would I help clean the room the boys had used? There was so much technology, she said, and she didn't understand what mattered and what didn't. She said it like she was asking me to open a jar. I nodded like a good tenant. And here's the first twist you need to understand. By the time I walked into that room, I already knew I was going to take what I could. Not because I was evil, because I'd learned to live my whole life with a hunger that didn't have a name. The room looked half-packed, as if they'd planned to leave and never finished. Beds unmade, a sweatshirt slumped over a chair, a notebook open on the floor, the pages blank except for one sentence written hard enough to dent the paper. Do not open the window. It wasn't dramatic handwriting. It wasn't shaky. It was deliberate, like someone trying to leave a sign for the next person who would stand where they stood. The window was shut, latched, curtains drawn, and behind the curtains, the glass was smeared on the inside with something that looked like someone had pressed their palms there and slid downward slowly. I didn't touch it. I didn't look too closely. I started gathering the electronics, the laptop, the earbuds, the bag. And as I lifted Caleb's duffel off the floor, I felt something snag. A thin, fibrous strand stretched from the duffel to the carpet, like a root caught on fabric. I crouched and pinched it between my fingers. It didn't snap the way hair snaps. It pulled. It resisted. It felt alive. When it finally broke free, it left a tiny wet dot on my skin that cooled instantly, like a drop of water from a basement wall. I wiped it on my jeans and told myself it was lint, some weird plant fiber, something from outside. But it kept that cold for hours. The next night, I didn't wait for the porch light to go out to feel the apartment change. It started earlier, subtle. The hallway stayed colder. The walls creaked in a way that didn't match the building settling. And the smell, faint at first, like damp soil after rain, like mushrooms growing where they shouldn't. The freshmen's room stayed dark and silent, of course. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was watchful. I lay in bed and tried not to think about the notebook sentence. Tried not to think about those palm smears on the inside of the glass. Then I heard it again, the soft movement outside my door, a pause, a slow exhale. But this time, it didn't move past. This time it stayed. I stared at the seam where my door met the floor. A thin line of darkness, a shadow thickened there, as if something lowered itself on the other side to look through. The doorknob shifted just slightly, and I realized it wasn't being tested. It was being recognized. The cold from the hallway seeped under the door and wrapped around my ankles. It wasn't a draft. It was a presence. I held my breath. The shadow moved away, not down the hall toward the empty freshman's room, toward the living room, toward the windows. And here's the second twist. The rules weren't only about silence. They were about containment, because the windows weren't for air. They were for exit. I didn't open mine. I didn't even touch the latch. But I heard something at the glass anyway. Soft pressure, like fingertips tapping from the other side. Not a knock. Not a request. A test. The apartment remained silent, as if waiting to see whether I would give it permission. I sat up sweating and watched the curtain shift by itself, a fraction of an inch, just enough for a strip of outdoor light to cut through. And in that strip, I saw it. Not a face, not eyes, a texture. Dense, matted, dark, like wet hair, packed onto something that used hair as camouflage. It pressed into the glass from outside and then eased away, leaving behind a smear that looked exactly like the inside handprints from the freshman's room. My curtain settled back into place on its own. The strip of light vanished, and the apartment felt satisfied. Morning again. Evelyn made breakfast. She was polite, warm, ordinary. She asked if I'd had a restful night, like she didn't know what had leaned against my window. I nodded. I ate. I left for class with the stolen laptop in my bag. I told myself I was getting away with it. I told myself I was smarter than whatever lived in that apartment because I followed rules and kept my head down. I told myself I was the kind of man who survived. Weeks passed. Evelyn found new tenants, one at a time, quiet ones, desperate ones. They arrived with bags and assumptions. I explained the rules without making it sound like fear. They lasted as long as they lasted. Some didn't make it through the first week. Some learned quickly and stayed silent. And those were the ones Evelyn liked best. And I did something that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. I started helping. I started recommending the place to people who needed somewhere cheap. I started pointing them toward Evelyn Hart, like I was doing them a favor, because every time someone new came in, the apartment's attention moved off me. The hallway's cold stopped creeping under my door. The shadow didn't pause outside my room. The tapping at my window stopped. And my life, for the first time in a long time, felt steady. I thought I'd found a system, a rhythm, a trade. Quiet for safety, people for peace. I even told myself it wasn't my responsibility, that adults make choices, that rules were explained, that anyone could leave if they didn't like it. That's the lie people like me tell ourselves when we want to keep sleeping. Then, one night, a tenant didn't break any rules. His name was Jonah, a nursing student, soft-spoken, the kind of guy who said thank you like it mattered. He shut his window. He ate early. He went still when the porch light went out. He did everything right, and the apartment took him anyway. I knew because I heard that dry chain link sound again, closer than it had ever been, not through Jonah's wall, through my own floor. Like whatever moved at night wasn't just in the hallway. It was under the apartment, inside it. I lay there shaking, trying to convince myself it was pipes. Then, my phone buzzed on my nightstand, screen lighting my room briefly. A notification from the laptop I'd stolen weeks earlier. A file upload completed. I hadn't uploaded anything. My hands moved on their own. I picked up the phone and stared at the screen. The file name was simple. Tenant_list. Attached to it was a scanned page, my handwriting on it, neat and careful, listing names. Marcus, Ethan, Caleb, Reed, Jonah, and more, all of them under my name, like a signature at the bottom of a contract. I didn't remember writing it. I didn't remember scanning it, but the handwriting was mine. And next to each name was a small mark that looked like a check, except it wasn't a check. It was a tiny branching symbol, like a root drawn by someone who had studied how roots spread. My throat tightened. I slid out of bed and opened my drawer where I kept cash and spare chargers, and the little stolen things I told myself weren't hurting anyone. The drawer smelled like damp soil. At the bottom, beneath everything, there was a thin mat of fibrous strands, pale and slick, pressed into the wood like mold. They weren't sitting there like dust. They were growing upward, toward my hands. I slammed the drawer shut so hard it bruised my fingers, and that's when I understood the third twist. The apartment didn't let me stay safe because I followed rules. It let me stay because I was useful. Quiet tenants weren't the goal. Quiet tenants were the method. Silence made it easier to feed without being interrupted. And the ones who lasted, like me, weren't survivors. We were staff. I tried to leave the next day. I packed quickly, no noise, out of habit. I kept my hands from shaking by focusing on simple tasks: shoes, jacket, backpack, keys. I stepped into the hallway, and the cold hit me so hard my eyes watered. Evelyn's door was open a crack. I could smell coffee. I walked toward the front door, and the floor under my feet gave a tiny, wet-sounding creak. Not wood, not old building noise. Something flexible. Something that had been layered beneath the floorboards like padding. I reached for the doorknob. It didn't turn. I tried again, harder. The knob turned freely this time, but the door didn't open. It held like it was part of the wall, and behind me, from the living room, the curtains shifted, all of them, not from wind, not from a draft, together, like a single hand had tugged them. I didn't look at the windows. I didn't want to see what was waiting on the other side. But I felt it anyway, the apartment's attention sliding back onto me, heavy and patient. Evelyn's soft steps came down the hall. She didn't sound angry. She didn't sound rushed. She sounded like someone coming to check on a pot left on the stove. She stopped behind me, close enough that the air changed. I didn't turn around. I stared at the front door, like staring could make it remember it was a door. Evelyn spoke in the same gentle tone she used at breakfast, as if we were discussing rent. She said it was hard to find reliable people. She said she'd been very good to me. She said the apartment liked me. And then, quietly, like a fact she didn't expect me to argue with, she said I'd already paid. My mouth went dry. I asked how, not out loud, just inside my head. But she answered anyway, not by speaking louder, not by changing her tone, by stepping closer until something cold and damp brushed the back of my neck through my collar. I understood without seeing. The robe was never the point. The older woman was never the point. Evelyn Hart was a shape the apartment wore in the daylight, because people trust a gentle landlord more than they trust an empty hallway. I backed away from the front door without meaning to. My heel hit the baseboard. the exact spot where the rust-brown bead always returned, and when it touched my shoe, the stain wasn't dry. It pulsed, a small pressure like a heartbeat in the wall. The floor under me gave another wet creak, and something inside the baseboard shifted as if the apartment was making room for me, not to let me leave, to fit me in. I'm writing this now because writing is the only thing I can do without breaking the rules. I can't shout for help. I can't run water. I can't open a window. I can't even make enough noise to sound like panic without feeling the hallway cold begin to move. The front door still won't open. Evelyn still makes breakfast. She still asks if I'm doing well in school. And at night, when the porch light goes out, I feel the fibrous strands under my skin, tight and cool, like roots learning the shape of my veins. I used to think the apartment took people. Now I think it plants them. Because the hallway isn't just cold anymore. It's familiar. It feels like the inside of something that recognizes my scent. Sometimes, when I lie still enough, I can feel the baseboard under my bed respond faintly, like it's listening for me. And here's the part that matters to you. If you've made it this far, you've already done the one thing Evelyn's apartment needs most. You stayed. You didn't get up and walk away when it got uncomfortable. You didn't close the page. You didn't stop. That's the test. That's the rule underneath all the rules. The apartment doesn't care about the hour. It cares about obedience. So, listen carefully. Tonight, when your room goes quiet, notice what you've been ignoring. The faint tapping you blamed on wind. The damp smell you blamed on old walls. The small, rust-colored stain that keeps returning no matter how many times you clean it. And when you catch yourself thinking it's nothing, remember this. Some places don't need you to open a door. They just need you to prove you can be trained. Because once you learn to stay still, once you learn to keep quiet, once you learn to follow rules you don't fully understand, you start doing the apartment's work for it. And it already knows your name.